It's a pleasure to have you join us on another episode of Money Matters on TV360 Nigeria. I am Okpeyemi Owosheni. We start off with business news. The Federal Executive Council has instructed the Presidential Committee on Compressed Natural Gas to accelerate its effort to supply buses and make conversion kits more accessible to Nigerians. Minister of Information and National Orientation Mohammed Idris briefed State House correspondents after the council meeting presided over by President Bola Tinubu in Abuja. Idris said that to tackle the country's economic challenges, the council is prioritizing the provision of CNG-enabled buses and enhancing the agricultural sector to boost food production in the country.
A discussion on the CNG that the federal government has promised Nigerians. The Federal Executive Council has directed the Committee on CNG to expedite its activities to supply buses, to also make it possible for the conversion kits to be available to most Nigerians. Already they have started, but the Federal Executive Council directed that they should double their effort so that the conversion kits that we need for the CNG to operate will be made available. Also, the conversion centers that had earlier been approved will also be significantly be upgraded so that Nigerians will have more conversion centers, more conversion kits. The compliance level of CNG the federal government has directed need to go up so as to reduce our over-reliance on PMS, and this will in turn also aid our energy transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy.
The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has reaffirmed its preparedness to commence crude oil refining at the Port Harcourt refinery in early August 2024. Now, this was revealed by the NNPCL Group Chief Executive Officer Mile Kyari while addressing an emergency session at the National Assembly Joint Committee on Finance. Kyari explained that the Port Harcourt refinery will kick off production by early August this year, while that of Kaduna will commence by December 2024. Kyari, who had earlier announced 2 weeks from March 2024 as the kickoff date for production from the Port Harcourt refinery, maintained that he is not lying as he reaffirmed the new August 2024 date. We'll go on a short break and be back with more stories in the corporate world. Welcome back. Shareholders of AXA Mansard PLC will receive a total dividend of 3.6 billion naira for the financial year ended December 2023, now representing a total dividend of 40 kobo per share delivered by the group. This was contained in the company's updated corporate action announcement to the Nigerian Exchange Limited and obtained by my newsmen. Now, the board of directors has declared a total final dividend of 3 billion naira, 600 million to be distributed to shareholders. This equates to a dividend of 40 kobo per 2 naira share. This final dividend pertains to the full year account for the period ending 31st of December 2023. Guarantee Trust Holding Company PLC has announced the opening of its offer for a subscription of 9 billion naira ordinary shares of 50 kobo each at 44 naira 50 kobo per ordinary share. This follows the clearance of the offer prospectus and registration of the offer shares by the Securities and Exchange Commission Nigeria. According to a statement from the company made available to journalists, net proceeds of the offer will be applied towards the recapitalization of GTCO PLC's banking subsidiary, Guarantee Trust Bank Limited, as well as support group-wide growth and expansion initiative. Now, application list for the offer opens on Monday, July 15, 2024, and closes on Monday, August 12, 2024. Welcome back. Nigeria's inflation is showing no sign of slowing down as it jumped to 34.19% in June 2024 from 33.95% recorded in May 2024 amid worsening hardship in the country. The National Bureau of Statistics discloses in its latest Consumer Price Index and Inflation Report released on the 15th of July 2024. Accordingly, the country's inflation rate has been on a steady increase since December 2023 when it stood at 28.92%. Now, this development has seen the prices of goods and services rise in the period under review. On a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate was 11.40% points higher than when compared to the rate recorded in June 2023, which was 22.79%. The steady rise in Nigeria's inflation further raises worries for citizens who bear the brunt of a high cost of living and rising prices of basic amenities. Now, joining me on the program to discuss this further is economist Segun Sopitan. Thank you for joining me on the program, Mr. Sopitan. Now, inflation jumped to 34.19% in June 2024 from 33.95% recorded in May. Now, how do you think this high inflation rate will affect Nigeria's GDP and economic growth projections for the rest of the year?
Look, inflation is never a good thing for economic growth. And we continue to struggle with the inflation. This battle has been on for getting on to 3 years now. And you know, the potential outcome of this is simply that growth is going to be mitigated. We will not be able to achieve the growth projections that we have set for ourselves. Let's not forget that the government set an inflation rate target in the budget for 2024 at 24%. And here we are, a wide 10% off the mark. The growth projections, if I recall well, is somewhere around 3.6 or 3.7% in the budget. The Q1 for Q1 2024, I think we did 2.97% GDP growth rate. So again, very far off the mark. And with the inflation continuing to increase the way it is, you know, with the continuing rise in the cost of goods and services in the country, it's going to be extremely difficult to achieve our growth projections. So this is something that the government will need to do something about very quickly. Otherwise, and you must remember that the objective at any point in time of any economy will be to ensure that the economy is growing at a rate faster than its population growth rate. And our population growth is about 3%. So right now we're actually trending below our population growth rate. That's dangerous. You're basically heading for a whole lot of hardship and a lot of negative indicators if this trend is allowed to continue.
The country's inflation rate has been on steady increase since December 2023 when it stood at 28.92%, and this has raised concerns about the potential impact on the economy and consumers. The CBN has also chosen several measures at the challenges, but the inflation rate is not coming down. Now, what else do you think can be done to tame this inflation, bearing in mind that the MPCA, the interest MPR has been increased severally this year? So what other measures do you think can be done to tame inflation in the country?
Yeah, we will continue to have this conversation. We'll continue to put out our suggestions. It will seem as though the policymakers are not listening. One can only pray that that is not correct. One can only hope that they indeed are listening to you know, all of the voices that are weighing in on this issue. The first thing I'd like to say about this is the inflation itself is actually underreported, and this has to be stressed. It's about time that the National Bureau of Statistics reviewed its methodology, especially the composition of the basket of goods in the CPI. You know, as it is now, it's obvious, you know, it's painfully obvious to even the blind that inflation cannot possibly be 34%. You know, it's just take any good or service across any sector. I don't think that the increase in prices have been anything less than between 60, 70, in some cases as high as 300% in the last 1 year. So telling ourselves that inflation rate is 34%, we're doing ourselves great harm. Because what this then means is that the government is underreacting in a situation where indeed what we have is galloping inflation, tending towards hyperinflation. But we're telling ourselves that, well, the inflation is still crawling or just approaching galloping. Our policy actions and responses are going to be wrong. And that's why you see that the CBN is still throwing the traditional inflation control measures at the problem. We're still talking about increasing NPR. We have continued to increase NPR for 2 years in a row, at least, right? And inflation has stubbornly continued to increase. What does that tell us? It's not working. We've got to do something else. So the standard monetary policy instruments or policy instruments that the CBN is available to the CBN at the monetary policy rate, you increase that so that you can mop up liquidity. You can increase your cash reserve ratio. You can increase your loan deposit ratio. You can, toy or tinker with the asymmetric corridor that will determine how much rate banks borrow from the CBN or lend to the CBN, and all of that. But all of these things have been done repeatedly, consistently for too long without any response. In fact, if you track the trajectory of month-on-month inflation over the last year, you will find that it's dancing its own dance. The dance that the rates are dancing definitely is not to a tune being sung by the NPR, by the CBN's NPR. Because ordinarily you would expect that, this changes will track, what's happening with NPR in a converse relationship. So the more NPR goes up, the more you should be able to see month-on-month inflation drop. However, what you've had is it's been a yo-yo. It's gone up, it's come down, it's going back up now, month-on-month inflation. So that should tell us that something is really, really wrong with that policy instrument. And I think that even though we have to agree that there's a monetary policy, there's a money supply problem, and this instruments really are targeted at mopping up money supply and reducing it significantly. For some reason, it's not working. So we need to do something more about money supply. We need to mop up, we need to reduce as drastically as we can the money supply from the 92 trillion naira level where it is now, roughly, circa. We've got to get it back to where we were about 2 years ago, where we're talking about 50 trillion, maybe 40 trillion. That's a huge gap to cover. And obviously, monetary policy rate, cash reserve ratios, and all of those things will not do it alone. We've got to start thinking about issuing special government securities that would attract inflows of especially portfolio investors and also local investors that would help, mop up these funds, from the banking system, into the coffers of the CBN so that liquidity can be curtailed. Of course, there's a converse, there's a flip side to that, which is, the effect that would have on the cost of borrowing and, access to credit. But there's got to be a trade-off, but what's clear is that what's happening now, as far as monetary policy is concerned, is not working, and we've got to do something differently and something more.
While you were speaking, Mr. Sopitan, you mentioned that the NBS is under-reporting inflation rates in Nigeria. So how do you think we can monitor the NBS to ensure that they are giving us accurate figures when it comes to inflation to help governments with policies that would help in regulating inflation rate?
The quality of the conversation around inflation in the places that matter the most, the quality of the conversation is simply not good enough. We're not speaking to the issues. In the National Assembly in particular, they have the oversight function over the executive. Of course, the CBN is an organ of the executive arm of government. The National Assembly, through its various committees, whether it's in the House of Representatives or the Senate, can play a significantly huge role in driving the conversation around, availability of accurate data and statistics to help policy formulation. So that's one thing that I think we need to see more of. We need to see the National Assembly, for example, and I've suggested this before. Call the CEO, the CEO of the MBS, call him for a hearing and let him come explain to Nigerians how they are saying inflation is 34%. Meanwhile, just between last month and this month, the price of beans has almost doubled. I spoke with somebody, a market person, just yesterday, and she was telling me that I think she's saying her bag of beans is about 140,000 naira now. She bought it at about 80 or 90,000 just last month, right? So the MBS needs to explain this, to Nigerians. How is it that rent, for example, was trending just last year for a 3-bedroom flat in a middle-income community, maybe 1 million, 1.5 million. We're talking 3 million, 3.5 million now. That's 100%. So what's the component of their baskets and what's the weight that they're attaching to the various components of the basket? They need to come out and explain how they calculate, their inflation numbers so that Nigerians can have a bit more confidence, but more importantly, so that policymakers can have accurate data that can help direct, policy formulation. As we are now, we're simply underreacting. I think that Nigeria as a country, the government especially, the different monetary policy and fiscal policy sides of the government are underreacting to the situation. We have a crisis on our hands, and we're not handling it well because the data is not telling us the truth.
Well, just recently, the federal government says it plans to open a 150-day duty-free import window for food commodities as it stepped up efforts to tackle rising inflation, which has affected many Nigerians. And you would agree with me that food inflation is the prices of food is one of the main contributors to inflation. Now, I would like to know, is this likely to address the problem of inflation?
Yeah, possibly to a certain extent, but I think it's far too little to have the kind of impact that is required. If you first of all, what happens after the 150 days? That's a question that occurred to me. If you say you've got a 150-day duty-free window, what's the complementing policy structure that will then pick up from where that particular measure drops the ball? So the ball is you are going to reduce duties on food imports for a 150-day period. That's almost like half a year. Okay, that's great. So hopefully food prices will come down by between 10 to 20% because that's about the proportional component that import duties represent in the cost of food. in the cost of imported food. So let's assume that there's a 10 to 15, maybe 20% drop in the price of food as a result of this policy. At the end of 150 days, what happens? What exactly is government thinking will happen that will make sure that the prices don't then go back to where we were 150 days ago? And I think that's the issue. So the policy may achieve some reduction. First of all, that reduction will be nowhere near enough, in my view. But also more critically, we will simply reverse back to status quo after that policy window, after that window closes, because nothing else has been done to ensure that prices, stay where they were when the policy was introduced. So, yeah, we'll see some effects, but it's not enough.
So the plan is to get better, for things to get better in the country. Now, so that we return back to status quo. So what other measures do you think the government can implement to curb the rising inflation, especially in the food sector? Because it is quite alarming, if you ask me.
Yeah, as far as, within the food sector. So first of all, I think it's also important to state that inflation, in as much as we talk about food inflation as much as we do, it's not the only issue we have. The exchange rate, the floating of the currency last year, June, July, is a major contributor to the inflation that we're seeing now. So it's not just the food supply and food inflation problem. The cost of other goods and services that are indexed against the dollar have also gone up. and we've got to deal with that. But to speak about, the food issue, I think that what we need to do, do we have the courage? It looks like we do not have the courage to do it. But for me, there's only one answer. The reason prices have gone up as badly as they have is twofold. It's the floating of the currency, like I just said, and the removal of subsidy on petroleum products, because that had a direct impact on transportation costs and an indirect impact on the general cost of goods and services, because the people, everybody, takes some form of transportation or the other, and everybody powers their businesses and homes with petrol. So once that subsidy went, there was always going to be, a directly proportional reaction in terms of prices. So what can we do? What can the government do? The savings from the subsidies must be plowed back. Now you can be targeted, you can target subsidies at food and transport costs as against petroleum products. We've taken it out of the petroleum product, of PMS in particular. And I think that it's the horse has bolted from the stable. You can't drag it back in. But can we take those savings that I have personally computed, and we're talking about 6 trillion naira every year. That's a lot of money. Can we take that 6 trillion, split it two ways, and direct 3 trillion into food subsidies and direct 3 trillion into transportation cost subsidies, working with farmer cooperatives, farmer unions, transport unions, all the various registered transport unions, finding a way to distribute those monies directly into the hands of operators in exchange for some sort of price control. That would have an immediate mitigating effect on inflation. We need some sort of radical action like this to deal with this problem, because if we don't, it's not the potential outcomes are ominous and very disturbing.
Well, we've spoken about things that the federal government can do, and like you said, it means tackling what's called petrol scarcity and all of that. So what role do you think state governments can play in collaboration with the federal government to address inflationary pressures at the state level?
Well, I think that the state governments and state governors have a lot of influence and can contribute quite a bit to this issue in terms of solutions. Regardless of the potential constraints from a constitutional and legal framework point of view, I think that when it comes to farming, for example, the state governments can do a whole lot in increasing access to the food production across the country. So everything should not just be left to the federal government and Ministry of Agriculture. The states, for example, can work hand in hand with Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Water Resources to talk about all year farming, all season farming, irrigation. What can we do with regards to that? What can we do with regards to making farm inputs available, fertilizer, seeds that have been enhanced for high yield. These are things that other countries are doing to deal with food security. And then of course the physical security as well. The state governments can actually do a lot, regardless of the issue where governors say they are not the chief security officers of the state because they don't have control of the security apparatus. The truth of the matter is that they do have a lot of influence, and they hold monthly meetings with the heads of security services in their state. There's a lot that the state governments can actually contribute to ensuring that farmers can farm across the country, including in those places where banditry, kidnapping and all of that has really driven people away from the farms. The governors need to do more. So I think that we should also be making these demands of the state governments as well.
What advice would you give to consumers and businesses on how to manage their finances in the midst of this rapidly increasing prices of goods and commodities in the country?
Well, look, the straits, it's dire straits that we find ourselves as Nigerians, and every single time that you visit the market, depending on the frequency of your visits, prices have moved. If you visit once a week, I think everybody would attest to this. The price of whatever thing you're going to buy in the market would have moved. The only question is by what degree would it have increased? But it would have increased just on a weekly basis, right? So we've got to get creative. The first lady, the wife of the president, there was a video that trended recently with her, putting up a garden in Aso Rock. As political as that might seem, I think it's absolutely one of the things that Nigerians need to start adopting. Even if you live in Lagos, you can do. There are forms of farming that you can adopt that doesn't require too much land. You can farm in bags, in jute bags. You can hang jute bags in the air. You can put them on the ground and plant yams and plant vegetables. You can buy layers, chickens, and get eggs from them. And you can even maybe, depending on how much space you have, if you have 3 or 4 chickens and they're laying 1 egg per day, then you've got 3 to 4 eggs per day, and just do the numbers for a month. You'll find that you have quite a number of crates of eggs every month. So we've got to get creative with that type of stuff. Plant vegetables. That's as individuals. Of course, there's something else that I think that individuals and small businesses need to start thinking about. You've got to inflation-proof your revenues, your income, by investing in some sort of dollar-denominated instrument. And these things are not really as difficult to come by as one might think, because there are a lot of apps now that provide people with the ability to even invest $1, as little as $1 in shares on foreign stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, and all of that. You can actually buy shares for whatever value that you want to, as little as 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 naira. You can invest in instruments that will give you dollar-denominated inflows, revenues, but also more critically, preserve your naira against the inflationary trend that we're currently experiencing now. The CBN would not want this, would not want pressure on the naira by people, converting to dollars, but people have got to look out for themselves as well, So that's something else. And then for businesses, you've got to cut costs. Even for individuals, you've got to cut costs. If you are paying for compact DSTV, maybe you want to, step it down to, if you're on compact plus or premium, step it down to compact, or go down to the other bouquets, excuse me, or even go off DSTV entirely. There's IPTV these days now. You would be amazed at the amount of content that you've got on things like YouTube and a lot of other free streaming services online. Where all you need is unlimited data in your house and a smart TV or an Android box to convert your non-smart TV, to a smart TV. So we've got to do stuff like this, because really these are difficult times, and people have got to get creative with measures that they can take to survive and protect their income.
Oh, like you said, we need to get creative with our measures, spending the time things get better in the country. Economist Segun Sopitan, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Well, that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I am Okmeyemi Owusheni. See you next time.